Simple Flowers by Stacy Hoffman, copyright 2012. I have been creating miniature dolls for over 27 years. Over the years, I have developed quite a few techniques for interesting florals. One of my favorite techniques to use is brass wire with a faux enamel filler. Depending on the filler you use, the brass wire can be very evident and give a cloisonné type effect, or it can be a more subtle jewelry type glimmer. In this video, we are only covering the most basic flowers to be made with this technique. Hence, it is well suited to beginners. Tools of the trade. The tools for this trade are not that difficult to acquire. You will need bent nose needle pliers, I prefer palm grip, several utensils that are round at different diameters, finishing nails, crochet hooks, knitting needles, etc. You will need brass wire in 34 gauge and wire cutters or nail clippers to cut the wire. You can use several different things as the formulation for inside the floral elements. Thin-bodied Subo glue, fingernail polish. If you use the glue, you can tint it with acrylic paints or watercolors in the tube variety, and the center of the flowers can look very nice with just the acrylic paint. In some areas, you will find a product called grate glass. It is a lacquer that you can use to actually dip the leaves into. Our first project is heather using microbeads. Twist the brass wire back on itself until you have a long spiral rod. Cut off pieces of the spiral rod from anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 inch long. They can be varied in sizes. No need to make them exactly alike. You can also save the cut-off pieces from other flowers to use to make your heather. Pick up each stem with your pliers, dip them into a puddle of glue, and withdraw in a dragging motion to coat the wire. Dip the coated wire in the microbeads and set aside on plastic to dry. After it has completely dried, if desired, you can gently shape the wire into a small curve. Do not try to curve it too strongly or you will cause the beads to fall off. The first real project is a leaf spray. Here I have a larger round diameter object, and I am using it to make my rounded leaf shapes. Notice I twist it several times in order to make a small stem. We folded the wire over our form again, and again we're twisting to make a small stem. And now, in order to make the larger part of the stem, I'm grabbing both leaves and twisting. After I've gone down about 1/4 inch, I will form another leaf. You can either make the leaves no stem, as close to the actual base of the thick stem as you desire, or you can leave a small sprig for each leaf. This is a matter of preference. Now, in order to shape each leaf, you need to grasp it firmly with your pliers just at the very tip. Notice how I'm coaxing it into a point. If you get the base too stretched out, put your tool in and rotate slightly to round out the bottom of the leaf. Now you are ready for your first coat of paint. Here I'm using fingernail polish mainly simply because it was very accessible for this video. After you've put on the first layer, you need to set it aside and allow it to dry. You can either stick the end of the stems in a piece of styrofoam, or you can grasp them with an alligator clamp. Now we're using the second layer of paint, and as we're doing the second layer of paint, we are also coating the actual stem. After it's been coated on both sides, we'll set it aside to dry. When you are using anything but the glue, the window of time that you have to bend and shape the leaves is rather crucial. If you try to bend them too quickly, it will stick to the tool and tear the material. If you wait too long, however, it will lose its elasticity and have a tendency to crack and fall apart. I find waiting approximately an hour after I put on the last coat is right about the time that I want to start shaping my leaves and petals. Notice how I take the center of the tool along the vertices of each leaf to shape into place. Then I grasp just the tip and give a quick tug. On to the two-petaled bud with leaves. Because we made leaves in the previous segment, I'm going to concentrate on just the buds. Wrap your wire, and I'm using a finishing nail because I want something very small. I only turned it 1/360 to anchor that loop in place before making the second loop. Because this is only a two-loop flower, now you will want to keep on twisting in order to make a stem. Go further down along the brass wire and form your second bloom. Again, the same technique is used, and you can either continue to make blooms down the entire length of your brass wire, or you can alternate leaves and blooms. Whenever you want the main stem to be longer, just grasp the floral elements you've already made and twist. Now we're going to open the actual petals. Open the petals with your pliers, because if you don't open the petals, you will not be able to apply the colorant correctly. Again, in this sample, we're using fingernail polish. We're just filling in each circle, and then we will set it aside to dry. This is a floral segment that has some blooms and some leaves, and it's now ready for the second coat of paint. Frequently, I will do the second coat on the blooms and set it aside to dry for at least 15 minutes before going and doing the second coat on the leaves. This just makes it easier not to accidentally upset work I've already done. Here I'm shown taking the green fingernail polish and applying it to the leaves. And please note, green fingernail polish is something that comes in and out of style. If you happen to stumble across a color that really appeals to you, buy as many bottles of it as you possibly can and hoard them. Okay, now I'm shown actually shaping the petals. In this particular bloom, the first petal is rolled into a really tight cylinder. And then the second petal is simply folded on top of the first to cup it generously. To shape the leaves, again, you're creasing the center, grabbing just the very tip, and giving a twist. It's that last twist that makes the most difference when shaping your leaves. While this all does take practice, once you've done a few hundred, it pretty much becomes second nature. And the nice thing about the brass wire is you can take it and twist it almost anywhere. I will admit doing the colorant does take time, and you have to be prepared to finish it from start to finish. It's not really something that you can put down and go do something else. If you do need to be able to have a little bit more flexibility as to your timing when shaping the actual petals and flowers, You are well advised to use just the colored thin-bodied glue. I like the watercolor colorants for the thin-bodied glue because it gives a more transparent effect. If you like a more opaque effect, the recipe is 2 parts glue to 1 part acrylic craft paint. Now, as you notice, all the elements of this floral are spread pretty far apart. This is simply because as you're working on coloring them, it's much easier if they're not all in one tight bunch. When they've been completely colored, formed, and set aside to dry, then you can use your fingers to bend them in a more graceful drape for your doll. There we have our finished product ready for the last green, which goes just on the stem and is used to tint the base of each bloom with a green calyx. When you get into smaller areas, sometimes it can be difficult to achieve what you want with a paintbrush. You can use a toothpick and dip it in the colorant of your choice to get in and do the very fine, tight areas of your florals. I also prefer a toothpick when I'm doing the centers of flowers. The 3-petaled bud. This is the next up in complexity. It is also one of the more versatile flowers. Depending on the size of the rod you use to make the petals, these can be infinitesimally small or almost on the large side. Again, we're making 1 loop, anchoring it tightly, a 2nd loop, and an anchor, and then we'll finally do a 3rd loop to anchor before we start twisting our stem. Notice how I push the loops back towards each other before I anchor in place. This is to keep the petals relatively uniform in size. The versatile 3-petaled can be done as a closed bud or left open as a very small filler flower. You can do it on rods as small as large needles to something almost 1/4 of an inch in diameter. Any larger than that and it loses some of the effectiveness. Now I'm going to be shown opening the flowers. This is the tricky part for a 3-petal, because you must grasp the center petal and pull it out to one side. Basically, you are trying to make a triangle of the 3 loops. Use the tip of your tool to bend all the loops close together. You want them open so your colorant can get everywhere, but you want them relatively tight together so that the center of the flower will stay the same from one bloom to the next. You can either use the petals rounded, or if desired, you can go in with the tip of your tool and actually shape each petal into a point. This is a matter of personal preference. It's a little bit on the time-consuming side, but again, it's not as difficult as I'm making it look because I'm trying to keep everything under the camera as I'm doing it, which makes things a little bit more awkward than usual. I've attached the stem to an alligator clip, and now I'm ready to color the piece. Again, I'm using fingernail polish. This time I'm using a soft ivory. And note, the larger the shape gets, the more likely that the fingernail polish is going to pull away from the center and bead on the side. This is typical. You just go back and add more color until it decides to stay where it was put. Sometimes you might have to do this 2 or 3 times on this first layer of fingernail polish. After it has been set aside and allowed to dry, the next layer will go on much easier. Okay, now we're ready for the second layer of paint. It takes at least 2 layers. On some of the larger flowers, it can take up to 3. While you don't want to increase the thickness any more than necessary, you do want enough filler between the brass wire that it will hold together and not fall apart. As you can tell, the second coat does go on much easier. I will normally coat both the front and the back when doing this second layer of paint. Now we're going to do the centers of the flowers. The center of the flowers were done by dotting each one with glue and then dipping it into glitter. After that has dried, you will be ready to shape the petals. Notice how I'm cupping the side of each petal in and then folding the cupped petals together. This is our closed bud shape. If you do not want a closed bud, then all you have to do is shape the petals without folding it towards the center. You can either curl them slightly or you can curl them tightly. This is a matter of preference. The more tight you curl it, the smaller your finished bud will be. And now we're ready to coat the stem with green and to do the calyx at the bottom of each bud. If you were doing these to glue directly to a gown and not for a bouquet or a spray that will hang down, you could leave off doing the green step as you will be cutting the petals off. This same base can be used to create the open 3-petal flower. Here we're shown doing the centers. I'm just dipping my toothpick in glue, I'm dotting the center, I'm dipping it into my container of micro glitter, and after I allow it to set aside and dry, I will shake off all the excess glitter. If you don't want to actually use the glitter, you can use a pearlized acrylic paint. You can also use small micro beads instead of glitter. I have even used some of the designer sand that they use in sand painting. It comes in lots of different colors, and depending on the area you live in, it could be very, very accessible. This is showing the same technique on a different colored flower in the vain attempt that it might photograph just a little bit better. Oh well, so much for that idea. But here you have the mauve with the white center after the excess glitter has been dusted off. This is what it looks like with the petals slightly shaped. On to the tiny folded flower. This is a very easy flower to make. It looks like a modified snowdrop. All you're doing is a single loop. Twist a stem, go down, make another single loop. We're actually going to shape the petals by indenting the top of each of these single loops. Make as many as you like, but don't use too large of a tool. This particular flower is only well adapted to smaller diameter rods. You get too large and it just doesn't work anymore. Okay, now I'm going to show you what I meant by shaping the tops. You're going to take the needle nose pliers, grasp it in the center of each top, and bend it directly down to the base of the circle, like so. You'll end up with something that looks like half of a butterfly. And because these petals, after they're painted, are just gently folded together with your fingers, they will not come undone. If you tried to actually exert a lot of force in shaping them after the colorant had been added, they might lose the shape. So again, this is a very basic filler flower. If you're doing a ball gown with 2,000 plus flowers, you're actually going to need a few flowers that aren't torturous to make. Here, the fingernail polish is being used. And again, you're going to do one coat, set it aside to dry, come back and do a second coat. Here, the second coat is being applied. And after the second coat of color is applied to the petals, you will go ahead and paint the stem. Because of their smallness and delicacy, these are well suited to half-scale projects. Now you see, I'm just grasping the two petals between my fingers and gently stroking them together. Very little force is being used. This action makes a more natural appearance and does not put so much pressure on the petals that you're pulling them out of shape. You do want to stroke the blooms into position before you do the green on the stem. It just makes it much easier to get in there than leaving the petals open. Okay, now we're getting ready to put the colorant on the stem. Again, we're using green fingernail polish simply because it's very convenient, and I just happened to find a color by Avon called Spruce Green that is delightful. Okay, we're using the brush to get into all the large areas, and if I have some smaller areas that I'm having difficulty getting into, I'll just take my trusty toothpick, dip it directly into the fingernail polish, and use it to coat the areas that are hard to access. After I've done all this, it's set aside to dry. These are closed buds. These are the tiniest of the buds. The same technique can be used to make Lily of the Valley. Here I show 3 circles, and now I'm taking my small crochet hook and I'm dragging hard on the tip of each of the round circles. I'm going to end up with a long oval. This long oval will be the basis for making my bud. I'm going to take my needle nose pliers and I will grab the tip of each long oval and start curling the wire down. So you end up with a donut-like shape. I then use the pliers to squeeze the edges together because I want this to be a very tiny, delicate structure. After I've bent all the petals into shape, I will put them in an alligator clip and proceed to paint. You are not trying to do anything but put just a glob of color on top of this little knot of brass wire. You set it aside, let it dry, come back and put a second coat. Depending on the size of the buds that you want, you may even desire to go back and make a 3-coat of paint on this particular type of flower. Here I'm shown using green on the stems. Notice how the green pops out the color of the buds. Without the green on the stems, the buds have a tendency to disappear, especially if they're done in white or ivory. This same technique can be used for lily of the valley. In order to create lily of the valley, you want to shape 6 buds per stem. Here I'm showing you taking the opened format and stretching each of the circles out with the crochet hook. Once they're all stretched out, you're going to curl them back against themselves just like you did in the previous segment. The main difference with the lily of the valleys and the closed buds is simply the way they are formatted around the stem. To do the lilies of the valley, I do clusters of 6. And they are spaced in a symmetrical fashion around the stem. Again, make sure that they don't get too wide as you curl them down. You're looking for a very closed structure. This is a very small flower with a lot of detail. Here we're shown putting the first coat on just the very tips of the buds. Because of the smallness of this floral, it is better used around the edges of a floral element on the gown rather than the center, as it can get lost if there are too many other flowers clustering around it. After doing several coats on the buds, I'm now using a green to define the stem. The next point that I want to specialize with the lily of the valley is how you stroke it together. Here I'm shown using a toothpick to get into the small tight areas. When you finish the coloring and let it dry, you want to stroke so that they curl down in a drooping type arrangement. This is true of any of the florals that traditionally droop. Another example would be a bleeding heart. And there we go, our finished lily of the valley. The 2 methods for creating a mixed spray. When creating a mixed spray, one can actually twist all the elements together out of a single piece of brass wire. Here you see several 3-petaled blooms along with individual leaves. I could also, if desired, put in some very tight buds or some butterfly type flowers also. After you have been creating flowers for a while, mixing the different elements in the twisting will become much easier. Don't despair, however, if doing all the elements together at the same time seems a trifle too confusing. You can do each of the individual flowers separately on separate stems and then twist the stems together in different combinations. I will show that at the very end of this video. Okay, now that I've gotten most of the loops I want, it's now time to shape the individual elements. As you can see, this very front piece is going to be a cluster of 3 leaves. I take my trusty tool and I will shape the very tips of the leaves. Maybe just one more twist before we go. Not only can you combine the different elements in a spray, you can also twist them together so that they make a round medallion type floral. The more different flowers you try to add, the trickier it is to keep it straight in your head. The one advantage of doing them all in one lot like this is then you don't have to go back and glue these separate elements on the doll. They're all ready to go once you finish doing the colorants. Toward the end of my career, I got pretty darn good at that. But I will admit it's a trifle confusing, especially if a lot of the elements use the same amount of loops. Okay, now we're bending. We've bent our leaves, and I'm going to use the tool to open the center. And this combination, basically 3 leaves, a 3-petal bud, and another leaf, makes a very nice corsage, and was one of the easier of the mixed combinations to master. I'm going to go in, and I'm going to do the colorant on the leaves. After I've succeeded with the colorant on the leaves, I will go back and do the petals. When I'm doing a mixed element like this, I try to do all sections of the same type at one time. Hence, everything that's done in ivory, I will do at one time, and then the green elements are done separately, pink elements, etc. This is easier than trying to change colors constantly as I'm working my way down the stem. Okay, once this has been successfully applied, we will set it aside to dry. On to the second layer. After it's been layered and shaped, this is what the finished corsage looks like. Now, these are different elements that have been made separately, and they are aligned up along the main stem axis. Then the main stems are twisted together to secure them into place. Notice how I'm only adding one separate spray at a time. By utilizing this technique, it gets thicker towards the top of the spray. So if you're doing a wedding bouquet where you're having a lot of drooping sprays, this keeps the stem down at the far edges from getting too thick and ungainly. And let's add the larger flowers. Notice that we started with the very smallest, and as we are creating our spray, we're adding the larger floral elements last. This is simply a design technique. You can also add extra leaf stems to the flowers if you think you're getting more blooms than you are leaves. Okay. Now I'm going to add my largest flowers to this floral arrangement. I'm deciding where I want the tops of them to be. I'm going to gently hold them in place with my thumb, being careful not to smush them. And then I'm going to twist the wires together. As the number of wires gets to be more excessive towards the base, you might have to resort to using your pliers to twist the two pieces together. The more wires you're twisting together, the little bit more strength it takes. Okay, now to finish this off, I'm going to add another spray of leaves and twist together. Now if I wanted to do a simple sheaf of flowers for a floral tribute, I could surround this in tissue paper and tie it off with a floral bow. This also looks great in a box being delivered to the door. When you're doing the lily of the valley, you want to be sure that the leaf size is small enough that it's not going to overshadow the delicacy of the lily of the valley. I try to point them so that the lily of the valley is facing down. I'm going to add a couple of larger flowers right at the base of the lily of the valley, being sure not to put them so far down that the lily of the valley becomes obscured. Now notice how I'm bending the floral elements forward. That's simply to get a better look. Here are some of the finished samples of the floral sprays. You can do very delicate, you can do larger, you can go very large. And while my samples are only showing 2 color mixes, you can do as many colors as your imagination wants. These were simply kept a little bit on the lower side to show you just the basics of this technique. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I look forward to introducing more complicated forms. The end.